This past week, two National Guard soldiers were shot in D.C. One didn't make it home, and one is still fighting for his life. That's the first thing that matters this week. And we all need to remember Specialist Sarah Beckstrom and her sacrifice for this nation. Now, I do want to talk about this for a second. Everyone is rushing to label this as an Islamic terrorist attack. And from my experience on the ground, that just doesn't add up right now. So let's just slow down. What are the headlines? Islamic terrorist, Afghan threat, extremist attack. I want to explain why, from someone with a little bit of knowledge, that conclusion right this very second just doesn't make a lot of sense. First, this man wasn't just a regular ANA. The Afghan National Army had problems, and we all know that. But he was Afghan Special Forces, which was a completely different world. These were the guys who operated alongside our special forces, and he worked side by side with our CIA as well. They ran joint raids. They fought ISIS and the Taliban. These people lost their entire families for standing up with us at times. They weren't Taliban sympathizers. They weren't extremists. They hated the Taliban probably more than anyone watching the news right now ever could. People keep saying that he slipped through the cracks, and that's really not possible. He was special forces. He went through very extreme vetting, probably through the CIA, DoD intelligence screening, biometrics checks, unit history verifications, counterterrorism checks, tons and tons of interviews. I mean, he's had years of documented operational work with and around us. This wasn't some random refugee. This was an operator who had been vetted harder than 99% of any immigrants entering the United States. He did arrive in 2021, and he lived here for years, and his asylum was reapproved this year under heavy review. Then out of nowhere, he drives across the country, leaving his kids to kill two random National Guard soldiers. I've worked with the ANA. I've had contact with Afghan Special Forces, served overseas. I've worked around CIA operations. I know a little bit of how these systems function, and nothing about this fits the classic pattern of an ideologically motivated attack. My honest opinion, and people might not like it, if this wasn't a pre-orchestrated operation, it probably was some type of mental health break. The Afghan Special Forces community saw their entire worlds collapse. Many lost their brothers, their units, their entire families. A lot came here with no community, no support. And, even United States veterans with far more resources suffer catastrophic mental health breaks all the time. This doesn't excuse anything, and it definitely doesn't justify anything, but it's a far more realistic explanation than just Islamic terrorism. Labeling this as terrorism without evidence only fuels division. And, it shows that we really haven't learned a damn thing from the last 20 years. We've been going back and forth in wars. Not every Afghan is Taliban. Not every Muslim is an extremist. And, this isn't about defending anyone. This is just about slowing down and refusing to let fear drive the story. We owe the truth and the American people better than knee-jerk assumptions. Now let's get into today's AAR. All right, before we get into today's breakdown, I want to circle back to last week's mission, awareness before action. Last week, we talked about catching the exact moment when we disconnect. That little internal switch that flips right before we start to isolate or before we shut down or before we blow up. That moment is where the battle actually is. Because if you can catch the disconnect before it turns into withdrawal, before it turns into anger and the silence, then you can break the cycle before it breaks you. We said the cycle ends when you decide to stop repeating it. And I want you to keep that same mentality going into this coming week. Don't wait until you feel overwhelmed. Don't wait until the bottle's open. Don't wait until you're apologizing to your spouse or your kids or your friends. Recognize the feeling early. Name it and then take action. Right now, we're building momentum. This whole month is about stacking wins. Small ones, daily ones. You don't need a perfect week. You just need progress every single day. Choose connection over isolation. Choose presence over distraction. Responsibility over drifting. That's a win. Win stack. It might be slow, but they will stack up. Last week, I gave you 3 ways to speed up your VA claim because a slow claim is stressful, and stress is something we're working to reduce this year. Hit these 3 points quickly and clearly. Consistency is key. For the VA, consistency equals urgency. When you're consistent in your communication, your appointments, and your responses, your claim doesn't fall to the bottom of the pile. Document everything. If it's not written down, it doesn't exist. Symptoms, impacts, flare-ups, document it. You're not exaggerating, you're telling the truth of what you go through every single day. And use your resources. VSOs exist for a reason. They're free, they know the system, and they prevent mistakes that slow you down by months. If you didn't watch that breakdown, go watch it. Help support the channel and get the word out to other veterans and get what you earned. Get what you deserve. You don't want to leave benefits on the table just because you just assumed it would work itself out. Now we're going to get into the meat of today's AAR, because every soldier fights two battles. The one in front of them, which is the enemy, and then we all fight the one inside, which is ourselves. You know, that first battle is straightforward. It's brutal, but it's clear. There's danger, there's your mission, there's structure, there's a chain of command, there's a common enemy. You know where to focus your energy. But the second battle is the one that nobody really prepares you for, the one that waits for you when the other missions are all over, the battle that's in your head. No one tells you that taking off the uniform doesn't shut off the fight. You come home, you look normal, you're standing in a grocery store checkout line, and meanwhile you're fighting for your life inside. This is the part that civilians and families don't see. And this is the part where veterans often lose ground because we try to fight it alone. Like we said last week, every one of us is carrying something. We don't need to carry it anymore. Whether it's guilt, shame, anger, old memories, old battles, old versions of ourselves. These are the sandbags that weigh us down. Then you cannot win the internal fight while carrying every sandbag from every chapter of your life. Some of you are trying to run missions with a rucksack full of things that you should have set down years ago. This week, I want you to identify one sandbag, not 10, not everything all at once. Just find one thing and start work on cutting it loose. You just have to release it. It might take some work and you might need some help, but you have to. You don't win the internal battle through isolation. You win it through connection. So leaning on your family doesn't make you weak. Opening up to a brother or sister from service doesn't make you broken. Letting someone see you doesn't take away your edge or your pride or anything else. We all needed a squad downrange. You need one here too. The enemy out there, we face that together. The enemy inside, you're still allowed to call for backup. This week, your mission is really simple. Stay aware, break the cycle. When you feel yourself slipping, start stacking your wins. Release one sandbag and don't fight the internal battle alone. You're stronger than you think, you're more capable than you feel, and you're not doing this alone. Not as long as Charlie Victor exists. Stay steady, stay sharp. We've got your six.
Every single day in America, we lose veterans to suicide at nearly twice the rate of the civilian population. That number isn't just a statistic. It's somebody's brother, it's somebody's daughter, somebody's teammate. It's someone who should still be here right now. And that is exactly why we do this. Charlie Victor isn't just content, it's a safety net. It's a place where veterans can slow down and reconnect so we can think clearly and remember that we're not fighting these battles alone. If you get any value out of Charlie Victor, I'm asking you for one thing. Help us to grow these safety nets. Give us a follow on TikTok and YouTube at Charlie Victor Vet. Every time you comment, like, or share, you put this message in front of one more veteran who might need it. And if you want deeper dives, I post all of my written pieces on medium.com under M. Bennett SR. Those articles are there to cut through the noise and talk about the stuff that actually affects us. We're building a community here, one veteran at a time. It's a place where we check on our people, we stay grounded, and we steady each other when life gets heavy. So hit follow, share this with a brother or sister who needs it, and help us make sure that no veteran ever has to walk through the dark alone.